I didn't plan to buy a bicycle that morning, but the blue one at the yard sale looked at me like a dog in a shelter, hopeful and a little embarrassed. The frame was the soft color of a summer pool. The bell was dented. A piece of green tape held the torn handlebar grip together. A hand-lettered tag said, $20, works, sort of. I laughed, then felt guilty for laughing. I was in Austin, Texas, on my way to get breakfast tacos, and I told myself not to collect another project. My apartment already held a leaning tower of half-finished ideas, a guitar with 2 strings, a box of Polaroids I meant to scan, and a shelf with 3 jars of mysterious screws. But the bike kept staring. I squeezed the brake lever. It stuck and groaned, like a door in an old movie. The owner, a woman with a sun hat and a relaxed smile, said, "It rides. It just prefers flat ground." I like the honesty. I handed her a 20 and walked the bike home, my tacos forgotten, the sun climbing, the chain rattling like a pocket full of coins. In the cool shade of my small living room, the blue bike leaned against the wall and made my couch look lazy. I wiped dust from the top tube with an old t-shirt. Under the dust, the paint glowed. "You'll do," I said, and felt ridiculous immediately, but also better. I made a list. I always make a list when I feel lost. New brake pads, new chain, grease, maybe new tires. I searched for a repair video, then stopped. I wanted the learning to be slow and local, not the frantic shuffle of pausing and rewinding strangers. On South First Street, there's a hardware store with a bell that rings when the door opens. I wheeled the bike there. The bell rang. The air smelled like old wood and the warm dust of cardboard. Behind the counter stood a man named Hank, who has eyebrows like bookmarks and calls everybody buddy. Hank listened to my description, nodded, and then asked, "What's your plan for the weekend?" I told him I'd planned to do laundry. He held up a tiny tube of grease. "Upgrade your plan," he said. Back home, I flipped the bike upside down. The seat looked like a slice of toast. The chain sagged and left a black line on my wrist. I set my phone to play quiet music, some sleepy guitar, and took a breath. The first satisfying thing was removing the old brake pads. They were worn into shallow smiles. I replaced them, then pressed the lever and felt it snap back like a new idea. I cleaned the chain with a rag until the rag looked like I had worked in a mine. My hands turned gray. I kept going. A neighbor named Pete walked by my open door with his dog, Maple, who sniffed the air like I was baking something interesting. Pete leaned in. "You fix bikes now?" he asked. "Just this one," I said. "I'm learning." He sat on the step and watched. It felt like we were in a small town, even though sirens and buses sang on the street outside. When I finished, I stood the bike on its wheels, rolled it forward, and listened. No scrape, no groan, just a whisper of rubber. The first ride was at dusk, which is the magic hour in Austin when the heat finally loosens its grip. I wore a helmet I found in the back of my closet. It had a sticker of a cartoon avocado on the side. I coasted down Mary Street, past porches with fans and citronella candles, past a man grilling who lifted his tongs in a friendly salute. The bike felt honest. It didn't try to impress me. It simply cooperated. At the corner of South Congress, I stopped for a red light and met my reflection in the shop windows. I looked like a child who had just learned to ride and couldn't believe his luck. When the light turned, I rolled along the curb, bell chiming once, a little shy. I rode by the neon booths, the murals, the crowd waiting outside the ice cream place, and then turned toward the river. The evening smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke. I crossed the bridge slow, looking down at the dark water, and I had the rare feeling that nothing was missing. 2 days later, the front tire went flat. It happened in the parking lot of a coffee shop, right after I locked up. The hiss sounded like someone telling a secret they shouldn't tell. I stared at the tire, then at the sky, as if the sky had done it to me. I unlocked the bike and pushed it inside, careful not to smear my hands on anything. The barista, who had pink hair and a tattoo of an orange on her arm, watched me with a grin. "Rough morning?" she asked. I told her about the yard sale, the bell, the chain, the brake pads, the whole romance. She listened like it was a podcast. "You're close," she said. "Just a new tube. There's a shop 2 blocks down. Tell them Jess sent you." I sipped an iced coffee with both hands, like a nervous squirrel, then wheeled the bike to the shop. The bike shop was bright and neat, with a chalkboard that said, "We fix fear." I liked that. A tall guy at the counter wore a cap that said Barton Springs or Bust. I told him Jess sent me. His name was Ramon. He looked at the tire, pressed it gently, and nodded as if it had confessed. He handed me a new tube and showed me how to install it using a wheel on display. His hands moved the way a good teacher's voice sounds, steady, clear, patient. I did the work on a little stand near the window while Ramon checked in every few minutes, like a lifeguard making sure I didn't drown in tiny tools. When I finished, he spun the wheel and smiled. "Clean," he said. I bought a small pump and a patch kit the way someone buys a dictionary for a new language, excited, a little embarrassed. That night, back home, the blue bike waited by the door, ready. I realized I was a little ready too. I wanted a destination. Austin is full of excuses to go places. The trail by the water, the taco trucks that only exist on corners after dark, the bookstores where you can listen to the rain even when it isn't raining. I picked a modest goal, ride to Zilker Park at sunrise. I set an alarm, slept badly because I was excited, then woke up before it anyway, smiling, somehow 12 years old again. The air was faintly cool. The birds had tiny arguments in the trees. I pedaled through empty streets and arrived at the park just as the sun pushed up a new page of light. In the open field, "Do wash my tires." A runner waved at me gently. I waved back. The city, which can be loud and impatient by mid-morning, was soft and forgiving. I walked the bike to the edge of Barton Springs and watched a few brave people swim in the chilly water. The water looked like a piece of sky had fallen and decided to live here. I sat on the grass, the blue frame bright beside me, and thought, I didn't buy a bike. I bought a new way to pay attention. On the second weekend after the yard sale, I turned my kitchen table into a tiny workshop. The salt shaker shared space with a set of Allen keys. A loaf of bread leaned against a can of chain lube. I told myself this wasn't permanent, though I liked the look of it. It made me feel like a person with a hobby he actually does. The apartment smelled a little like oil, a little like coffee, and a little like the orange-scented cleaner I used to erase my mistakes from the floor. The blue bike had become a member of the household. When I came home from work, I'd say, "Evening," without thinking. I imagined the bike nodding back. In the evenings, I rode simple loops. Up to the library, down to the HEB, across the bridge and back. A rhythm began. Helmet, lock, bell, the quiet click of the freewheel when I coasted. I kept noticing small things. A mailbox painted like a watermelon, a shoelace sleeping in the gutter, a cat who sat in the same window every day like a bookstore owner. These were small, but they belonged to the life I was building by moving my legs. One Tuesday, my boss asked if I could start coming in earlier. I'm not a morning star. I flicker, but the bike helped. I left home at 7, which felt heroic, and took a longer route that added 10 minutes, but subtracted stress. On Riverside, a car door opened without warning. I flinched, my front wheel wobbling, and then I was past it, heart loud in my ears. The driver shouted, "Sorry." He looked genuinely sorry, which helped. I learned the way you learn to cook. You burn a few things, and then you stop burning as many. I started to wear a bright vest that made me look like I worked at an airport. I took side streets where the trees draped the road like gentle curtains. I waved to crossing guards. They started to wave back. On Friday evening, after a long week, I rode to a baseball field where the city league was having a game. The sun was low. The bleachers were warm. I leaned the bike against the fence and sat among strangers. I didn't know any of the players, but I felt loyal. The crack of the bat was a clean sound, like a promise kept. A little girl 2 rows down kept kicking off her flip-flops, then giggling when her mom put them back on. A man with a copper beard sold snow cones from a cart, and I bought a cherry one that turned my tongue into a cartoon. After a while, a guy sat next to me and nodded toward the bike. "That yours?" he asked. I said yes. "Looks like the one my grandpa had," he said. "Same curve in the top tube." We talked about bikes and grandpas and the way old things find new people. He said his name was Daryl and that he used to race when he was younger. "You should ride out to the Greenbelt," he said. "Not the rocky parts, just the entrance. You'll feel like you stepped into a cooler version of the city." The next morning I tried it. The path to the Greenbelt starts behind a strip mall with a nail salon, which is proof you can hide wonder in plain sight. I rolled under the shade of oaks, and the temperature dropped like someone turned the dial. I followed a path where the light played checkers on the ground. A dog sprinted past me, ecstatic to be alive. A couple walked hand in hand, counting steps out loud in Spanish. When the creek appeared, thin, clear, shy, it made a secret out of familiar land. I didn't go far, just far enough to know I could return. On the way back, I stopped at a taco truck that had a plastic flamingo tied to the roof. The cook called me boss as he slid a plate toward me. The salsa was the color of a good sunset. I ate standing up, next to the bike, which waited patiently like an old friend who doesn't mind silence. Not everything felt easy. One night, I misjudged a curb and popped the rear tire. The sound was rude and final. I was a mile from home. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice your own shoulders. I could call a ride, I thought, but it felt better to walk. I pushed the bike along, the rim thumping softly, and it wasn't so bad. The moon looked a little like a flat tire, too. A guy on a porch asked if I needed a patch. I told him I was okay, and we exchanged the kind of wave men give when they are trying to show they are both fine and also, somehow, human. Back home, I patched the tube at my kitchen table. The patch kit smelled like school glue and memory. I waited the right number of minutes because Ramon's voice lived in my head. When I pumped the tire and it held, I felt a small, bright victory. The blue bike began to change my map of the city. Places that used to be far away moved closer. I said yes more. If a friend texted about a pop-up market near East Cesar Chavez, I went. If the sky looked interesting in the late afternoon, I rode toward it. Once I crossed the bridge and a gust of wind pushed against me so hard I laughed out loud. A guy on a scooter glanced over, surprised. I shrugged. The wind shrugged back. On a Sunday, I pedaled to a plant nursery and locked the bike to a rack shaped like a sunflower. I walked through rows of ferns and succulents and cacti that looked like they had opinions. I bought a small pot hose and clipped it in a crate on the back of the bike. On the ride home, the leaves trembled like they were excited about their new address. At a stoplight, a woman rolled down her car window and said, "Your plant looks happy." I said, "Me too." Later that week, I stopped by the hardware store to thank Hank for sending me on this path with a tube of grease. He smiled like a teacher who sees a student return after summer. "How's the ride?" he asked. I told him the truth. It made my days feel wider. He nodded and pointed to a corkboard near the door, cluttered with flyers, guitar lessons, a missing tabby cat, a yard sale that I now thought of as destiny. On the bottom corner was a small note with a tear-off phone number. "Slow roll Sunday. Easy ride." All welcome. I took a tab without thinking. It felt like the logical next page. I texted the number on a Thursday night. Hi, I'm new to this. I ride a blue bike that used to be shy. The reply came fast. Welcome. We meet at 9 a.m. at the Little Stacy Park tennis courts. Pace is friendly. Helmets and good vibes. Saturday felt like Christmas Eve. I oiled the chain, wiped the frame, checked the brakes, and laid out my clothes like a kid before picture day. Sleep slid in and out. In the morning, the sky was a confident blue. I rode over early, heart polite but loud. At the courts, a small group gathered. All kinds of bikes. All kinds of people. A woman with a basket full of sunflowers. A guy with a folding bike that looked like a practical joke until he rode it, and you realized it was a miracle of engineering. A teenager with stickers on everything. A retired man with calf muscles you could write home about. The organizer, a cheerful person in a yellow cap, introduced herself as Trina. "We roll easy," she said, "and we stop for murals and water." That sounded like a mission statement I could believe in. We set off like a sentence that begins with "meanwhile." The pace was slow, almost conversational. We moved through quiet streets where the trees reached for one another over the road. Bells chimed politely when we passed. A jogger clapped for us like we were a tiny parade. We stopped at a mural of a giant taco wearing sunglasses, and someone took a group photo, everyone squinting into the sun except the taco, who had come prepared. At the river, we paused to drink water, and Trina read a few lines from a poem taped to her handlebar. It was about going somewhere not to arrive, but to learn the names of the birds on the way. I liked that. I didn't say so. I just breathed slower. Halfway through the ride, a chain slipped on the teenager's bike, and she groaned. We pulled over. Without thinking, I knelt, clicked the chain back into place, and spun the pedals. It was a tiny fix, but my hands knew what to do because of all the quiet hours at my kitchen table. The teenager said, "Thanks, dude," like I had rescued a cat. I stood up with black fingers and a dumb, proud smile. Trina handed me a biodegradable wipe like a knighting ceremony. "You're one of us now," she said, and it didn't feel silly. The rest of the ride hummed. The city looked cooperative. Cars paused. Pedestrians smiled. The light fell in slices on the road, and our shadows stretched and shrank like we were rehearsing for a play. When we finished, nobody hurried away. We leaned our bikes on a fence and sat in the grass. Someone passed around orange slices, which always taste like victory. People talked about routes and favorite bakeries and how to carry a pie on a back rack without heartbreak. Daryl from the baseball game wandered up, late and laughing, surprised to see me. He'd heard about the ride from a different note on a different board. "Small city," he said, and we bumped fists. Trina asked if anyone had ideas for the next slow roll. I found myself raising my hand. My voice came out steady. "There's a taco truck with a flamingo on top," I said, "and a path behind a strip mall that turns into a secret." Heads nodded. Plans formed like weather. Over the next weeks, my calendar filled with small circles labeled ride. We met on Sundays, and sometimes Wednesdays when the light felt long. The group grew the way plants grow, quietly, then suddenly. A barista joined us, Jess, with the orange tattoo. Hank came once, squinting in the brightness, riding a bike older than me, but smoother. He carried a gentle pride the way some people carry a song under their breath. We started to bring extra tools. A woman named Crystal brought a floor pump in her trunk like a magician. I printed a little map with hand-drawn stars that showed water fountains. Someone made stickers, "Slow Roll Sunday," in letters that leaned forward, ready to move. One morning, clouds gathered but held back their rain. We rode toward the market near East Cesar Chavez. The air felt like a held note. At an intersection, A driver in a white truck rolled down his window and asked for directions. Trina explained, and he thanked us with a smile that used his whole face. Little good moments collected in my pockets, too light to feel, but there when I reached. At the market, I bought a jar of pickles from a man who called himself Professor Brine. He insisted I take a slice from a paper cup. It tasted like a memory of summer hidden in a basement for emergencies. I strapped the jar in the same crate where the plant had first ridden home. The blue bike carried it all: a plant, a jar, a week, the small weight of someone else's problem when we stopped to help a stranger with a loose seat. One Sunday evening, after a humid day that softened even the loudest edges, I coasted back across the river. The water wore the sky like a borrowed sweater. On the far side, I turned onto my street, a little tired in a satisfying way. The apartment smelled faintly like chain lube and toast. I leaned the bike by the door. The bell, still dented, gave a small sound, almost a whisper. I washed my hands and noticed the line of grease that never really leaves no matter how you scrub. It looked like a thin road on my skin. I made tea. I stood at the window and watched a neighbor walk his dog, Maple's tail like a metronome. The city hummed. A distant siren threaded through the trees. I felt grateful in a simple, ordinary way that didn't need speeches. The blue bike had become less of a project and more of a place. When I sat on the seat, I was somewhere safe and open. When I pedaled, I was part of a sentence that began long before me. People moving themselves because they could, because it felt good, because the world seems friendlier when you meet it at 11 miles an hour. I thought about the yard sale and the hand-lettered tag and the way the owner had said prefers flat ground. I smiled. We had climbed some small hills together since then. Not mountains. Not newsworthy. Just the kind of hills that make your legs warm and your breath honest. I didn't fix the bell's dent on purpose. It sounded like what it was. A voice that had learned to speak up even with a wobble. I texted the slow roll group that night. A simple note about Wednesday's route. Replies stacked like cards in a friendly game. Someone suggested we stop by a new bakery that sold guava turnovers. Someone else said we should invite the crossing guard who always waves. I set my phone down and looked at the bike, at the thin black lines on my hands, at the plant on the shelf now trailing vines over a stack of mail. I felt the room settle around me, the quiet confident and kind. Outside, a breeze nudged the leaves, and somewhere a chime answered. I thought of Ramon's careful hands, of Hank's eyebrows, of Jess's grin, of Trina's yellow cap bright as a lemon. I thought of the tiny note on the corkboard and the way small ideas can open into big days if you let them. When the tea cooled, I finished it in 3 patient gulps. I turned off the light. The blue bike rested by the door, ready, hydrating the night with its small promise. Tomorrow, we'll go again. Not far, not fast, just enough to feel the city say yes.